On a warm September evening in 1982, 19-year-old Jennifer Walsh rang the doorbell of a modest Tudor-style house on Willow Creek Drive in Arlington, Virginia. Clutching a folder of references and hoping desperately that the Kovacs family would hire her for their advertised babysitting position. She needed the money for college tuition, and the job seemed perfect. Regular hours, decent pay, and only 2 children to watch. What Jennifer could not have imagined as she stood on that suburban doorstep, smoothing down her skirt and rehearsing her introduction, was that the next 8 months would transform her from an ordinary college student into an unwitting observer of one of the most sophisticated Soviet espionage operations ever conducted on American soil. This is the story of how a babysitter's careful attention to the small inconsistencies of family life would ultimately expose a network of deep-cover agents who had spent years building false identities in the shadow of the nation's capital, proving that sometimes the most dangerous secrets hide not in government offices or military installations, but in the ordinary homes of seemingly unremarkable families. But before we dive into this story, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so we can bring you the most gripping Cold War and espionage stories every day. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support us. Jennifer Walsh was a sophomore at George Mason University that fall, majoring in elementary education with dreams of becoming a teacher. She had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Baltimore, the oldest of 4 siblings, and she had been babysitting since she was 14 to help her family make ends meet. The work came naturally to her. She loved children, had infinite patience for their questions and tantrums, and possessed an intuitive understanding of what they needed before they knew to ask for it. By the time she reached college, she had built a reputation among her neighbors as the most reliable babysitter in the area, the one you called when you absolutely needed someone trustworthy. The advertisement she had seen on the university's job board had been straightforward enough. Professional couple seeks responsible babysitter for 2 children, ages 6 and 8. Monday through Friday, 3 to 7 in the evening. References required. Competitive pay. Jennifer had called the number listed, spoken with a woman who introduced herself as Elena Kovacs, and scheduled an interview for that Thursday evening. Elena Kovacs answered the door with a warm smile that reached her eyes, a woman in her late 30s with shoulder-length brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the slightly harried appearance of a working mother at the end of a long day. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, minimal jewelry, and spoke with an accent that Jennifer could not quite place. Something Eastern European, perhaps, softened by what must have been years of living in America. "Jennifer, yes, come in, please," Elena said, stepping aside to allow her entry. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. My husband Peter and we are both working such long hours now, and we need someone reliable for the children." The house's interior was comfortable, but not luxurious, decorated with furniture that looked like it had come from moderately priced department stores. Family photographs covered the mantel above the fireplace, showing the Kovacs family at various parks and museums. The children's artwork adorned the refrigerator, and a stack of mail sat on the kitchen counter next to a bowl of fruit. Everything suggested a normal, middle-class American family trying to balance work and childcare like millions of others. Elena introduced Jennifer to the children. Michael was 8, a serious boy with dark hair and his mother's eyes, who shook Jennifer's hand with surprising formality. Sarah was 6, more outgoing than her brother, with blonde pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. Both children were polite, well-behaved, and clearly accustomed to having babysitters, a fact that Elena acknowledged somewhat apologetically. "We have had several babysitters over the past year," Elena explained as they sat at the kitchen table. "Not because of any problems, you understand, But students graduate, or they find other jobs, or their schedules change. It is always something. We are hoping to find someone who can stay with us for longer, someone the children can really trust. Jennifer went through her references, explained her experience, and answered Elena's questions about her availability and her approach to discipline and homework help. Elena listened carefully, occasionally making notes on a pad of paper, and Jennifer got the impression of someone who took childcare very seriously, who wanted to make absolutely certain she was leaving her children in capable hands. Peter Kovacs arrived home about 20 minutes into the interview, a tall man in his early 40s with graying temples and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him a scholarly appearance. He wore a suit and carried a briefcase, and he apologized for being late, explaining that his work at the State Department often kept him past normal business hours. He asked Jennifer a few additional questions, mainly about her emergency response training and whether she was comfortable preparing simple meals for the children. By the end of the interview, Jennifer felt confident she had made a good impression. Elena and Peter exchanged glances, engaged in a brief, whispered conversation, and then Elena turned back to Jennifer with a smile. "We would like to offer you the position," Elena said. "Can you start on Monday?" Jennifer accepted immediately, relief flooding through her. The pay was slightly better than what she had been earning at her previous babysitting job, and the regular hours would allow her to maintain her class schedule without conflict. They agreed on the terms, Elena gave her a key to the house, and Jennifer left feeling pleased with how the evening had unfolded. The first few weeks of the job passed without incident. Jennifer arrived each afternoon at 3, letting herself in with the key Elena had provided. The children would return from school around 3:30, dropped off by a carpool that rotated among several families in the neighborhood. Jennifer would help them with their homework, prepare their dinner, usually something simple like macaroni and cheese or chicken nuggets, and supervise their playtime until one of the parents arrived home, typically between 6:30 and 7. Michael and Sarah were easy children to care for, bright and well-mannered, if somewhat reserved. Michael loved reading, particularly books about space and astronomy, and he would often sit quietly with a book while Sarah played with her dolls or drew pictures. They rarely fought with each other, and they followed Jennifer's instructions without complaint. In many ways, they were model children, almost unnaturally well-behaved for their ages. Elena and Peter maintained equally predictable schedules. Elena worked as a translator, she had mentioned during the interview, specializing in technical documents for various government contractors. She usually arrived home first, around 6:30, tired, but always taking time to ask about the children's day and to thank Jennifer for her work. Peter's hours at the State Department were less predictable, sometimes arriving just after Elena, other times not returning until well past 7. When he did arrive, he would greet Jennifer politely, ask briefly about any issues, and then retreat to his study to work on papers or make phone calls. For the first month, Jennifer noticed nothing unusual about the Kovacs family. They seemed like thousands of other dual-income households in the Washington suburbs, working hard, raising their children, trying to maintain some semblance of work-life balance in a demanding environment. Jennifer settled into the routine comfortably, using the quiet time while the children did homework to study for her own classes, earning money that made her college expenses more manageable. But sometime during the second month, small details began to accumulate at the edges of Jennifer's awareness, things that seemed insignificant individually, but that together created a subtle sense of wrongness she could not quite articulate. It started with the telephone. The Kovacs house had 2 phones, a standard touch-tone model in the kitchen and an extension in the master bedroom upstairs. Jennifer occasionally needed to answer when calls came in during the afternoon, usually friends of the children or automated sales calls, But she noticed that whenever she picked up the kitchen phone, there was often a faint clicking sound, followed by what seemed like an echo on the line. At first, she attributed this to the house's old wiring or a problem with the phone company's equipment. But the clicking was too consistent, too regular, occurring on almost every call she made or received. One afternoon, while the children were playing in the backyard, Jennifer picked up the kitchen phone to call her roommate about their plans for the weekend. As she dialed, she heard the familiar clicking, and then, for just a moment, she thought she heard breathing on the line, not the normal background noise of a phone connection, but actual human respiration. She stopped dialing and listened carefully. The breathing continued for perhaps 3 seconds, then ceased abruptly, followed by the normal dial tone resuming. Jennifer hung up without completing her call, her heart beating slightly faster. She told herself she had imagined it, that phone lines could produce strange sounds that mimicked human noises. But the incident stayed with her, adding to a growing collection of small observations that did not quite fit together. The second thing she noticed involved the mail. The Kovacs family received a substantial amount of correspondence, far more than seemed typical for a household of 4. Every day, the mailbox would be stuffed with letters, magazines, catalogs, and packages. What struck Jennifer as odd was not the volume, but the variety of names on the correspondence. Most of it was addressed to Peter or Elena Kovacs, but occasionally pieces would arrive for Peter Henderson or Elena Morrison, or even completely different names that Jennifer did not recognize. When she mentioned this to Elena one evening, commenting casually that the mail carrier must be delivering letters for previous residents, Elena's reaction was swift and slightly too emphatic. "Oh yes, the previous owners, they did not file proper change of address forms," Elena said, taking the misdirected mail from Jennifer's hands with a quickness that seemed almost urgent. "We keep getting their correspondence. It is very annoying. I will handle this. Do not worry about it." But Jennifer had seen the postmarks. The letters were recent, not years-old correspondence from long-departed residents. And some of the magazines were subscriptions that had clearly been ordered within the past few months. It did not make sense that the Kovacs would be receiving current mail for multiple different names unless those names somehow belonged to them. The third anomaly involved the children's school records. Jennifer had been asked to pick up Sarah from school one afternoon when the regular carpool mother was sick. She arrived at the elementary school office to sign Sarah out for early dismissal, and the secretary asked her to confirm the child's full name for the release form. "Sarah Kovacs," Jennifer said. The secretary frowned, scrolling through her computer screen. "I'm showing Sarah Morrison. Is that the same child?" Jennifer felt a flicker of confusion. "I'm sorry, Morrison?" "Yes, that's what we have in our records. Sarah Morrison, daughter of Elena and Peter Morrison. Is that not correct?" Jennifer recovered quickly, not wanting to create any complications. "Oh, right, I'm sorry. Yes, Morrison. I must have been thinking of another family." But the discrepancy troubled her. Why would the children be enrolled in school under a different last name? She considered asking Elena about it, but hesitated, unsure whether it was her place to question such things. Perhaps there had been a divorce and remarriage, though Elena wore a wedding ring and had never mentioned any previous relationship. Perhaps Morrison was Elena's maiden name, and she had kept it for professional purposes, though that did not explain why the children would use it at school. These observations accumulated slowly over the next several weeks, each one individually explicable, but collectively forming a pattern that made Jennifer increasingly uneasy. She began paying closer attention to the house itself, to the family's routines, to the small details of their daily life. What she discovered only deepened her confusion. The Kovacs house had an unusual number of locks. The front door had 3 separate deadbolts, far more security than most suburban homes required. The windows all had additional locks beyond their standard latches, and Jennifer noticed that Elena always made a point of checking each window before she left for work in the morning, testing the locks methodically, as if following a mental checklist. The basement was kept locked at all times, a fact Jennifer only discovered when Sarah dropped her favorite doll down the basement stairs and asked Jennifer to retrieve it. When Jennifer tried the basement door, she found it secured with a lock that required a key, not just a simple interior door lock that could be opened from either side. "We cannot go down there," Michael said when he saw Jennifer trying the door. "Father keeps his work materials in the basement, and we are not allowed to disturb them." Jennifer accepted this explanation at face value, retrieved Sarah's doll with a broom through the gap at the bottom of the door, and thought nothing more of it. But combined with everything else, the locked basement took on additional significance. What kind of State Department work required such security that it could not even be stored in an unlocked residential basement? The most disturbing observation came in late November, about 3 months into Jennifer's employment with the family. She arrived one afternoon to find the house empty, which was unusual. The children's carpool was not due for another 30 minutes, but typically Elena would be home from work by this time, or she would have called to tell Jennifer she would be late. Jennifer let herself in with her key and began preparing an afternoon snack for when the children arrived. As she worked in the kitchen, she heard a sound from upstairs, a soft creaking of floorboards that suggested someone walking slowly and carefully, trying not to be heard. Jennifer froze, her heart suddenly pounding. She called out, "Hello? Mrs. Kovacs? Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped immediately. There was a long moment of silence, and then Peter Kovacs appeared at the top of the stairs, looking slightly disheveled and carrying what appeared to be a leather satchel. "Jennifer, hello," he said, his voice carefully casual, but his eyes sharp and assessing. "I did not hear you come in. I came home early to retrieve some documents I had forgotten this morning." Something about the explanation felt wrong. Peter's appearance was too calculated, his smile too forced. And why would he have been walking so quietly in his own house? Jennifer returned his greeting with an uncertain smile, watching as he descended the stairs and moved toward the front door. "The children will be home soon," Jennifer said, trying to fill the awkward silence. "I was just preparing their snack." "Yes, good, thank you," Peter replied, his hand on the doorknob. He paused, then turned back to face her with an expression she could not quite read. "Jennifer, I appreciate your discretion. Sometimes my work requires me to handle sensitive materials at home, and I would prefer if you did not mention to anyone that you occasionally see me here during the day. It is simply a matter of maintaining proper security protocols, you understand." Jennifer nodded, though she did not fully understand. "Of course, Mr. Kovacs. I won't mention it." After Peter left, Jennifer stood in the kitchen for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Everything about the encounter had felt staged, rehearsed, as if Peter had been caught doing something he should not have been doing, and had quickly constructed a plausible explanation. The leather satchel he had been carrying looked heavy, and when he walked past her, she thought she caught a glimpse of electronic equipment through the partially open zipper. That evening, after both parents had returned, home, and Jennifer was preparing to leave, Elena stopped her at the door with an envelope containing her weekly pay. "Jennifer, we are very pleased with your work," Elena said, her tone friendly, but her eyes carrying the same calculated assessment Jennifer had seen in Peter's gaze earlier. "The children have grown very fond of you, and we appreciate your reliability. I hope you will continue working with us for a long time." "Thank you, Mrs. Kovacs," Jennifer replied. "I enjoy working with Michael and Sarah very much." Elena smiled, but then her expression became slightly more serious. Peter mentioned that he came home this afternoon to get some papers. I want you to know that sometimes our work requires unusual schedules, and you may occasionally encounter one of us here during hours when you do not expect us. This is perfectly normal, just a consequence of the type of work we do. I hope it does not make you uncomfortable. The conversation felt like a warning disguised as reassurance. Jennifer assured Elena that she had no concerns, collected her pay, and left. But as she drove back to her apartment that night, she could not shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with the Kovacs family, that the pleasant suburban facade concealed something darker and more complex than she had been prepared to encounter. Jennifer tried to dismiss her suspicions as paranoia fueled by too many late-night study sessions and too much coffee. But the observations continued to accumulate, each one adding weight to her growing unease. She noticed that Peter and Elena never displayed physical affection toward each other in her presence. No casual touches, no quick kisses, hello, or goodbye, nothing that suggested a typical married relationship. They were polite and cooperative, but their interaction seemed more like that of business partners than spouses. The children, too, displayed odd behaviors that Jennifer had initially attributed to individual personality, but now seemed part of a larger pattern. They never talked about their extended family, never mentioned grandparents or aunts or uncles or cousins. When Jennifer asked Michael about his grandparents one afternoon, trying to make conversation while they worked on a school project, the boy's response was strangely vague. "They live far away," he said, not meeting her eyes. "We do not see them often." "Where do they live?" Jennifer pressed gently. Michael hesitated, and Sarah, who had been playing nearby, spoke up quickly. "Mother says we should not talk about family with people outside the house. It is private." The response was so deliberate, so clearly rehearsed, that Jennifer felt a chill run down her spine. What family taught their children not to discuss their grandparents with trusted caregivers? What possible reason could there be for such secrecy about basic biographical information? In early December, Jennifer's concerns reached a critical point. She arrived one afternoon to find Elena and Peter both at home, which was highly unusual. They were in the living room, speaking in rapid, urgent tones in a language Jennifer did not recognize. It was not Spanish or French or German, the languages she had some exposure to through her coursework. It sounded Slavic, perhaps Russian, though Jennifer had no real basis for that identification beyond movies and television shows. When Jennifer entered, both adults stopped speaking immediately and turned to face her with expressions that shifted too quickly from alarm to forced casualness. "Jennifer, you are early," Elena said, glancing at her watch. "We were just discussing some family matters." "I'm right on time, Mrs. Kovacs," Jennifer replied, checking her own watch. "It's 3:00. Elena and Peter exchanged a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. Peter collected some papers from the coffee table and excused himself, disappearing upstairs. Elena remained, making small talk about the children's upcoming school holiday program, but her distraction was obvious. That evening, after the children were in bed and Jennifer was cleaning up the dinner dishes, she found herself alone in the kitchen. The house was quiet. Peter was in his study with the door closed. Elena had gone upstairs to help Sarah with a bath. Acting on an impulse she would later struggle to explain, Jennifer opened the drawer where Elena kept household papers. Bills, receipts, the ordinary administrative detritus of family life. What she found made her blood run cold. Beneath a stack of electric bills and grocery receipts was a passport. Jennifer knew she should not look, knew she was violating the family's privacy, but she could not stop herself from opening the small booklet. The photograph showed Elena, But the name printed below was not Elena Kovac or Elena Morrison. It was Svetlana Volkova. The passport was Soviet, its deep red cover unmistakable even to someone with limited international travel experience. Jennifer closed the passport with shaking hands and carefully returned it to exactly where she had found it. She finished the dishes in a daze, her mind racing through implications she was not ready to fully process. When Elena returned downstairs and paid her for the evening, Jennifer managed to maintain a normal demeanor, though she had no memory afterward of what they talked about or how she got to her car. She drove to her apartment in a state of shock, her hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. A Soviet passport. Elena Kovac, the woman who claimed to be a translator for government contractors, who lived in a suburban Virginia house and drove her children to soccer practice and school concerts, was actually a Soviet citizen using a false identity. Jennifer sat in her parked car outside her apartment building for nearly an hour, trying to decide what to do with this information. She thought about calling the police, but what would she tell them? That she had snooped through her employer's private papers and found a foreign passport? That hardly constituted evidence of criminal activity. Perhaps Elena had been born in the Soviet Union and immigrated legally. Perhaps the passport was simply kept for sentimental reasons, a memento of her origins. But Jennifer knew, with a certainty she could not rationally justify, that this explanation was inadequate. The accumulated weight of all her observations, the locked basement, the multiple names, the excessive security measures, the children's rehearsed responses, the strange telephone clicking, the foreign language conversations, all of it suddenly cohered into a single, terrible conclusion. The Kovacs family were not who they claimed to be. They were Soviet agents, deep-cover operatives living false lives in the shadow of the nation's capital. The realization was so overwhelming, so far beyond Jennifer's frame of reference, that she almost convinced herself she was wrong. This was America in 1982, not some Cold War thriller. Soviet spies were supposed to be in Moscow or Berlin or other distant places, not babysitting employers living in 3-bedroom houses in Arlington, Virginia. But the evidence was undeniable, and ignoring it felt like a betrayal of something fundamental. Jennifer barely slept that night, tossing and turning as she debated her options. By morning, she had made a decision. She would go to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It was the only federal agency she could think of that handled espionage cases. And if she was wrong, if there was an innocent explanation for everything she had observed, then at least she would have done her civic duty. If she was right, then something far more important than her babysitting job was at stake. The FBI field office in Washington was located in a gray building that looked like countless other government structures in the city. Jennifer arrived during her lunch break from her morning classes, her stomach churning with anxiety. She approached the security desk and told the guard that she had information about possible foreign intelligence activity. The guard looked at her skeptically, a young college student in jeans and a sweater, but he made a phone call and told her to wait. 20 minutes later, Jennifer was sitting in a small conference room across from 2 agents. Special Agent Thomas Bradley was in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and the patient, slightly weary expression of someone who had heard countless conspiracy theories from nervous citizens. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez was younger, perhaps 30, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing as she studied Jennifer with careful attention. Jennifer told them everything. She described the Kovacs family, her employment as their babysitter, and the series of observations that had led her to suspect something was wrong. She told them about the passport she had found, about the multiple names on the mail, about the locked basement, and the excessive security measures. As she spoke, She watched the agent's expressions shift from polite skepticism to genuine interest. "This passport you saw," Agent Bradley said, making notes in a leather-bound book. "You're certain it was Soviet?" "Yes," Jennifer replied. "The red cover, the Cyrillic text. I recognized the Soviet seal from my history textbooks." Agent Martinez leaned forward. "The name on the passport. You said it was Svetlana Volkova?" "Yes, but she goes by Elena Kovac, or sometimes Elena Morrison. The children are enrolled in school under Morrison." The two agents exchanged a glance that Jennifer could not interpret. Agent Bradley asked several more questions about Peter Kovac, about his claimed employment at the State Department, about his schedule and behavior. Jennifer answered as thoroughly as she could, describing the leather satchel, the basement office, the unusual working hours. "Miss Walsh," Agent Martinez finally said, her voice careful and measured. "What you've described is consistent with what we call illegal agents, Soviet intelligence officers operating under deep cover without diplomatic protection. If your observations are accurate, if the Kovacs family are indeed such agents, then you've stumbled into a very serious situation. I need you to understand that you cannot continue working for this family. The risk to your safety is too significant." Jennifer felt her stomach drop. "So you think I'm right? They really are spies?" "We think your observations warrant serious investigation," Agent Bradley replied. "We'll need to verify everything you've told us, conduct our own surveillance, and gather enough evidence to support action. But Miss Walsh, I want to emphasize what Agent Martinez just said. You cannot return to that house. If these people are who we suspect they are, they've been trained to detect threats, and if they perceive you as a security risk, the consequences could be severe." Jennifer thought about Michael and Sarah, those polite, well-behaved children who had no choice in their parents' decisions, who were being raised in a world of lies and false identities. "What will happen to the children?" "That depends on many factors," Agent Martinez said gently. "But that's not something you need to worry about right now. What you need to focus on is your own safety. How do you plan to terminate your employment without raising suspicion?" Jennifer had not thought that far ahead. She suggested that she could simply call Elena and say she needed to quit due to increased course load at school, a plausible explanation that would not suggest she knew anything about their true identities. The agents agreed this was the best approach. They instructed Jennifer to make the call from their office while they listened, to ensure she did not say anything that might alert the Kovacs family to her discovery. Jennifer's hands shook as she dialed the number, and when Elena answered, her voice was friendly and unsuspecting. "Mrs. Kovac, this is Jennifer. I'm afraid I need to talk to you about my schedule." "Of course, Jennifer. Is everything all right?" "I've been struggling to keep up with my classes this semester, and my advisor has strongly recommended that I reduce my outside commitments. I'm so sorry, but I don't think I can continue babysitting for you. I know this is short notice, and I apologize for any inconvenience." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "I see. This is disappointing, Jennifer. The children will miss you. When is your last day?" "Could I work through the end of this week? That would give you time to find a replacement." "Yes, that would be acceptable. Thank you for the notice, and I'm sorry your studies are proving so demanding." The conversation ended politely, and Jennifer hung up feeling a mixture of relief and guilt. She had worked for the Kovacs family for nearly 4 months, had come to care about the children, and now she was walking away under false pretenses while setting in motion an investigation that would destroy their family's carefully constructed cover. Agent Bradley must have seen the emotion on her face. "You did the right thing, Miss Walsh. What you've provided could be the breakthrough we need to identify a Soviet intelligence network that might have been operating undetected for years. Over the next 2 months, Jennifer learned pieces of what her information had set in motion, though the FBI kept many details classified. The Bureau conducted intensive surveillance of the Kovacs house, documented Peter's movements, identified contacts he met with at various locations around Washington. What they discovered confirmed Jennifer's worst suspicions and revealed an operation far more extensive than a single family of deep-cover agents. Peter and Elena Kovacs were indeed Soviet GRU officers, members of Soviet military intelligence who had been inserted into the United States in the late 1970s using expertly forged documents and carefully constructed false identities. Peter's claimed position at the State Department was a cover. His actual work involved gathering intelligence on American defense policy and nuclear weapons programs. Elena's translation work was real, but served as a mechanism for accessing sensitive technical documents that contractors sometimes hired her to work on, documents she would photograph before returning to their owners. The locked basement contained sophisticated radio equipment for transmitting encrypted messages to Moscow, photographic equipment for reproducing documents, and files on American officials who had been targeted for potential recruitment. The passport Jennifer had found was one of several the Kovacs family maintained, allowing them to travel under different identities if they needed to flee or relocate. Most disturbingly, the FBI's investigation revealed that Michael and Sarah were not the children's real names, and they might not even be the Kovacs' biological children. The Bureau suspected that the children had been brought into the United States as part of the family cover, their presence making Peter and Elena appear to be an ordinary suburban couple rather than intelligence operatives. The children had been raised in this world of deception, taught to maintain cover stories, instructed never to discuss their background or family history. In March of 1983, federal agents arrested Peter and Elena Kovacs at their home. The arrests made national news, though Jennifer's role in initiating the investigation was never publicly revealed. The children were taken into protective custody, and their fate became a matter of sensitive diplomatic negotiation. Eventually, they were returned to the Soviet Union as part of a prisoner exchange, reunited with what the Soviets claimed were their biological parents, though American intelligence never confirmed whether this was true. Jennifer testified before a grand jury about her observations, describing in detail the accumulation of inconsistencies that had led her to suspect the family's true nature. Prosecutors praised her attention to detail and her civic courage in reporting what she had discovered, despite personal risk. The emotional aftermath of the case proved more difficult than Jennifer had anticipated. She struggled with guilt over her role in destroying the children's lives, even though rational thought told her that those lives had been built on lies. She wondered what would become of Michael and Sarah, whether they would be punished for their parents' espionage, whether they would even remember the babysitter who had cared for them during their final months in America. Agent Martinez visited Jennifer several months after the arrests to provide a final briefing on the case. They met at a coffee shop near campus, and Martinez explained that Jennifer's observations had led to the dismantling of a Soviet intelligence network that included at least 5 other deep-cover families operating in the Washington area. "What you did mattered enormously," Martinez said. "Most people wouldn't have noticed the things you noticed, and even if they had, many wouldn't have had the courage to report them. You potentially prevented significant intelligence losses." Jennifer stirred her coffee without drinking it. "I keep thinking about the children. They didn't choose any of this." "No, they didn't," Martinez agreed. "But neither did the American officials whose secrets might have been stolen if the operation had continued. There are no perfect outcomes in cases like this, Miss. Walsh. There's only doing the right thing and living with the consequences." Jennifer completed her degree and became a teacher as she had always planned. She never babysat again, finding the work too fraught with complicated memories. She married, had children of her own, built a quiet life that bore no resemblance to those extraordinary months when she had worked for a family of Soviet spies. But she never forgot the lessons of that experience, never stopped teaching her own children and her students to pay attention to the world around them, to trust their instincts when something felt wrong, to understand that courage sometimes meant reporting uncomfortable truths despite uncertainty and fear. The house on Willow Creek Drive was eventually sold to an unsuspecting family who knew nothing of its history. Jennifer drove past it once, years later, and saw children playing in the yard, a bicycle abandoned on the front lawn, the ordinary chaos of family life. She wondered if the new residents had any idea that their suburban home had once been an active espionage station, that their basement had contained equipment for transmitting secrets to Moscow, that the family who had lived there before them had been anything but the ordinary Americans they appeared to be. The Cold War eventually ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the world moved on to new conflicts and new threats. But for Jennifer Walsh, the memory of those 8 months remained vivid, a reminder that the most important battles are sometimes fought not by soldiers or spies, but by ordinary citizens who notice small inconsistencies and have the courage to act on what they observe. She had been 19 years old, a college student trying to earn money for tuition, and she had helped expose a sophisticated espionage operation simply by paying attention to the details that others overlooked. It was not the kind of heroism that earned medals or public recognition, but it was heroism nonetheless. The quiet courage of doing the right thing when it would have been easier and safer to look away. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories and check out the video on screen. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. See you next time.